one, the system is really treating us horribly, and the system is really taking away our voice, and is not seeing us as experts of our care. And two, the system is also not catering for very specific experiences such as schizophrenia, such as psychosis. And a lot of these experiences are almost like, let's just hand a psychotropic drug and shut them down, and that's a quick fix.
Hi everyone, this is episode 2 of the Mental Health Wolf YouTube channel discussing all things mental health. My name is Steve Lawler. I run a podcast called Legal Wolf, again discussing all things mental health, and I'm a mental health lawyer by background with 10 years experience. Today I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host Alena, Kahle, and also Kat McIntosh, who is the star of the show. So first of all, I will let Alena introduce herself, and then we'll move over to Kat.
Alrighty, it is episode 2. We're getting rolling. So my name is Alena. I have done a couple of podcast episodes previously with Steve, which was exciting. And my background is in international law and human rights law, and I have done some research for my thesis on human rights-based approaches to mental health, using law to empower people with mental illness who are put in mental hospitals and psych wards, and just having their rights be the empowering thing that gives them self-confidence. So that's been fun research to do, combining mental health and law together in like a sociological whatever perspective. And I've done some episodes with Steve on Indian mental health law. So those are fun to check out. But today we're going to a different country. We're going to the other side of the globe, outside of my expertise. So I'm excited to learn. And Kat is the star of the day. So Kat, give us your introduction.
Yeah, sure. So I am Kat McIntosh. I use she, her, his pronouns. And from my very obvious Caribbean accent, I live in the Caribbean, specifically Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't call myself a mental health advocate. I actually call myself a peer support advocate, or an invisible disabilities rights advocate, because I think that's a very specific perspective and narrative that is not often focused on. And I really got into it from my own lived experience. I'm diagnosed with so many different wonderful things wrapped up in one. I have bipolar disorder 1, psychosis, social anxiety, and complex PTSD. Um, Started experiencing these things at 16, did not know what in the world was happening. Um, but, our push through culture of, always striving through, even though you have a whole host of trauma, etc., behind you, that caused me to just go more into psychology, go more into counseling, try to figure out what was happening, and also caused me to have a extreme passion for social justice and social justice rights, and people who, systems I found didn't often give a voice, to speak up about their experiences. So I went into special education. I worked in women's rights for some time, until my most recent entering into finally working on mental health. And my reason for not being able to work on mental health before was because I really couldn't, due to my own challenges with my mental health. So as I, you know, got the correct treatment options, etc., to do that, then I was able to actually pursue the kind of fields that I wanted, which were very specific fields, like I said, in terms of this invisible disability rights and peer support of persons who have the shared lived experience of mental health, working together to help each other and help change systems. So I work as the manager for global for manager for Mental Health America, the manager of Global Peer Support, sorry, for Mental Health America. And I also work as the co-executive director and founder of Prisoners with Mental Illness, PWMI for short, which is a registered nonprofit in my country that's seeking to change world systems for persons like me. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So Mental Health America has a global peer support network. And you just pointed out that you don't like, calling yourself a mental health advocate so much as you prefer that term peer support or peer mentor, etc.
Yeah.
And obviously there's been a bunch of research that has really emphasized the importance, the use, the helpfulness, best practices in peer support, not just for mental illness, but for cancer, for homelessness, et cetera, et cetera. And what I've noticed is that so many people who are peer mentors, obviously it's the point of being a person who has lived through the same thing. But in general, in the mental health field, even mental health law, like everybody has had issues. You don't get into this field usually without having lived through something yourself that would give you like the reason to go into this
Yeah.
field. Is that your experience too?
So yeah, similar. So for me, the reason why peer support specifically was for lack of a better word, eye-catching for me, was because I found that within the mental health spaces that I existed, right? So since I started experiencing symptoms at 16, I started researching and looking for what existed in my own country, what existed in other countries in relation to mental health to really help myself. And what I found was that there was a great mental health focus. And that's wonderful because everyone has mental health and everyone should take care of their mental health. But I found that so much of the narrative was the conversations existed around anxiety and depression and suicide. And that's great, don't get me wrong. But what about psychosis? What about dissociation? What about all these other things? What about schizophrenia? And I didn't find resources that catered to people like me that was going through my specific experience. And I liken it to, when we speak about persons who have visual impairments, right? We speak about two type of people. We speak about the persons who may need glasses or contact lenses and may need the intervention that way. But we also speak about the persons who have extreme vision impairment, right? And they need access to Braille and they need those kinds of translations. And then working in special education gave me that lens that said, oh, we can focus on both at the same point in time. But I didn't feel like the traditional mental health systems were doing that. And that's what I wanted. And then when I found peer support, for me, peer support started in this very social justice oriented field that said that one, the system is really treating us horribly and the system is really taking away our voice and is not seeing us as experts of our care. And two, the system is also not catering for very specific experiences such as schizophrenia, such as psychosis. And a lot of these experiences are almost like, let's just hand a psychotropic drug and shut them down, and that's a quick fix, and that's not enough. And for me, peer support is particularly important to me, not just from a peer mentorship lens, but also from a having peers within all of our systems so that we can help our systems understand what it's like living with mental illness and how our systems need to be reshaped for persons with mental illness. So for one of the fields that I talk about often, like technology, how many of our technological fields actually, when creating mental health apps, speak to persons who have a extreme lived experience of having a mental illness. So do they talk to persons who have psychosis when they're building the apps to say, oh, I wonder how this user experience would affect someone with psychosis? And those specific conversations aren't happening in mainstream mental health systems in the way that it should. So that is my real reason for getting into the field, to help challenge the system, to have conversations in a much broader way.
You pointed out that there's just not enough apps that have that user experience friendliness for certain things. So anyone out there listening, UX designer, we need someone who has a specialization within UX design for particular perceived niche illnesses. Not saying they're actually niche illnesses, just saying they're perceived as niche illnesses. One point that I read on your LinkedIn, because you do your research, was that you have been trying to work towards policy changes. And you're emphasizing that right now quite a bit in your little talk, that systems need to change, structures need to change. We can't keep going on with marginal little improvements, but structural changes need to be made. And you have a social justice approach, which really has this emphasis on health, mental health as a human right, as something that should be equal, and as something where you shouldn't be begging for it, or like it should be like a market solution. The person who can pay for the best insurance gets the service. But where you have like this duty bearer, which is the government, who's supposed to help and has to legally help everybody equally. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your policy approaches, any kinds of victories that you've had with trying to legislate or get better policies in place, or perhaps the exact opposite, some absolute barriers you encountered where you thought, oh my God, how are we getting out of this mess?
Yeah, so I can only speak for my country. To to bring reformation to mental health in Trinidad and Tobago, when I started this work, I was like, oh, idealistic. We're just going to help the government understand the needs. Like, yeah. And, I went on all idealistic. And then I did a project where really sat with our Mental Health Act. And I had to be honest that before then, I knew of the Mental Health Act, I knew of specific framing in the Mental Health Act, but I hadn't really sat with it to really uncode it and decipher it. And when I started doing that, I was like, oh my gosh, this work is going to be a lot. And when I say a lot, so like for instance, first of all, our Mental Health Act is from 1976. So first of all, that's the framing that we're working in, right? Secondly, the very definition of having a mental illness includes any sort of treatment. So it can be you have just gone for one counseling, you are considered being mentally ill in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the problem that also, I mean, that in itself is problematic, but the additional concerns that happens is that if you are seen as mentally ill, you're also unable to be director of an NGO, be director of any sort of business. So all of your rights are being stripped away. The other much larger problem is that our people do not even know this. So, how many persons who have businesses, who have nonprofits, including myself, who is a director of a nonprofit in Trinidad and Tobago, don't even know that according to our law, our law thinks that they should not be. And our law is saying, oh, well, we don't think that you're competent enough to do this work. So, getting even our people to care about that framing, because in Trinidad and Tobago, there's this sort of cultural mindset of if it's not enforced, why should we really try to change it? Nobody's really like enforcing, nobody's stopping someone. If you go to register a business, nobody's going to stop you to say, do you have a mental illness? Like, you shouldn't be doing this, right? So if it's not enforced, then people don't really care. But the fact that it's there is such a problem. And to get people to understand that it should not be there has been the hugest barrier. um yeah, I'm still trying to figure out, my team and I are still trying to figure out what does that strategy even look like to get people to start to care. But we don't know right now, and I can be honest to say that we don't know.
Well, the point about people being denied certain positions if they have had even one counseling is, of course, sobering. It is pretty much like pretty in your face of the inequality and the discrimination there, which doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in other countries either. Like the issue of me still not being able to take out certain insurances, like a life insurance, because like 7 years ago I had therapy. It's not as blatant discrimination, but it is still not great.
Yeah.
Steve, what have you had? What have you had? Because you've talked to a bunch of 50 plus people. Have you encountered anything more extreme, or is that pretty much?
I think Africa has a big stigma surrounding mental health. I mean, obviously, I'm part of the Global Mental Health Peer Network, and I see the work that my colleagues do in the Africa region, which is commendable and very much needed. But I mean, don't automatically assume that everything is green in the UK, because it's not. We have our own problems with our mental health laws. Our mental health laws are currently going through some changes through court to make it more holistic, bring it into the 21st century, patient focused. And in many ways, India's Mental Health Care Act is more modern than ours, as the basis of our Mental Health Act was 1983. There were amendments in 2007, not a tremendous amount. These amendments, there was over 40 recommendations made in a white paper in terms of funding and giving the patients more rights. In terms of getting mental health insurance over here in the UK, it's not widely spoken about. There are private companies that do offer mental health insurance, and they offer a very comprehensive package, particularly Bupa. Other providers are available, obviously, but they do offer a very comprehensive package. But from my talks, from my podcasts, there's a lot of stigma in Africa. There's a lot of discrimination in Africa around mental health. It's not necessarily thought of as being something real. But also, you look at a country like the United States of America. Now, the general perception of the USA from an outside viewpoint is that they are very hot on everything. They're the land of the free. They are
the land of free markets, which means individual responsibility for everything.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
Go on.
But I mean, when I've talked to people in America about mental health, there seems to be a huge stigma in America around mental health. And the administrations, obviously Trump's administration didn't necessarily focus on mental health. In some ways, it probably contributed towards people's mental health. It's too early to say about Joe Biden's administration, because let's face it, he's got a lot more pressing challenges on his plate at the moment, one being coronavirus and getting all the vaccines rolled out. But to me, mental health does seem to be a huge sticking point in America from the guests I've spoken to, from the way that people are perceived. So I spoke to someone on an episode who gave an example of, if you've broken your arm and you go back to school and you've got a cast on, everyone's around you, they think you're like a superstar and they want to sign your cast. But if you've been in a mental health hospital and you've come out because you've received treatment and you say to someone, their body language is, oh, they don't know how to react, they don't know how to talk to that person. It's not necessarily that individual's fault, but I think it's the lack of people that have been educated around how to talk about mental health, which is a concern. And for me in America, that surprises me massively, because you would think America would be really good, really hot on mental health. But when you talk to certain people, you do realize that there is a stigma within America, within the Black community, especially in America, around what the term mental health means. So I think a lot of countries still have a long way to go, but I think we are getting better. And I think coronavirus has been the accelerator in realizing that we all have mental health. We all need to look after our mental health. And it's kind of put all of our lives into perspective a bit more. We're not necessarily me, flash holiday, flash car, flash watch, Instagram, posting, getting loads of likes. We seem to be more focused on our own health and our close friends and family. And we do seem to be starting to, well, particularly over here in England, we are starting to talk more about mental health. So that can only be a good thing, but there's still a long way to go.
There definitely is. Kat, so I was preparing for this recording, and I looked at a couple. I was trying to figure out the healthcare system of Trinidad and Tobago. Didn't get very far. I thought I can just have an expert explain it to me, aka you, hopefully. But I was surprised to see that Trinidad and Tobago has the third highest GDP per capita in the Americas, after the United States and Canada. Like, you guys, because of your oil and your fossil fuels, you guys are rich. If we just assume that means you'll have a lot of money to pay for healthcare, that would mean there would be a universally accessible healthcare system that everybody could just go to. There's great equipment at all the mental health facilities. Do you want to give me a reality check on that? How does the healthcare system work in very, very, very general terms?
Sure. So I love that you spoke about our GDP, and there's a perceived understanding that Trinidad and Tobago, and I mean, we are listed as high income countries, but I often like to remind people that our systems do not look like US and Canada systems in these countries that we're compared to. So I'm often very confused when we're lumped in, and therefore, people expect what they see in other high income countries they're gonna see here. I am grateful though that we do have universal health coverage. It's great that our people are able to, if they get in a car accident, just be taken to the emergency ward and not have a ton of insurance bills after they come out, of the hospital. um the, the problem with universal health coverage is that, I wrote a paper with some other peers in Global Mental Health Peer Network that we talked about the fact that universal health coverage is not enough. And it really isn't, because when you look at the accessibility of the service, when you look at the quality of these services, so for instance, when it comes specifically to mental health care, I have personally taken a stance that I no longer take services from our um, mental health services in our public health system. And the reason I've taken that stance is because of the awful experiences I've had within the system. So, for instance, when you have psychiatrists seeing umpteen amounts of persons in a day, as well as not having systems that ensures that there is a proper quality control, um, you get a lot of different things happening. So my experience was, and for a lot of Trinidad and Tobagonians, you speak to a psychiatrist for 5 minutes and they give you a diagnosis. That is in no way quality care. So I had a psychiatrist. I waited. I think it was 2 months before I was even able to book the appointment with him. And then I had to wait a month again for the actual appointment. And I showed up like 8 a.m., didn't see him until like 1:30 p.m. And he speaks to me for 5 minutes and says, "Oh, you have borderline personality disorder and there's nothing I can do to help you." So whilst that was really free, that wasn't good quality care. And every experience since then with the public health systems have been similar, where I speak to a psychiatrist again 5 minutes and they write me a prescription for psychotropic medications without actually understanding my quality of life, without understanding, what is specific ways my symptoms are impacting my life. For instance, I have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia that I got from from seeing a private doctor. When I when I highlighted the symptom to the public psychiatrist, they really just kind of shrugged it over. Not they did. Of, oh, depression will cause that if you're in a depressive state, like that happens. But I was in serious chronic pain that inhibited me from even lifting my purse or typing on my phone. Speaking to someone for 5 minutes can't point that out. In addition, when you talk about like the psychotropic medications, whilst there's a host of psychotropic medications that are available, one, I question, whilst I don't consider, um, you know, FDA system to be maybe the most hierarchical of anything when it comes to quality. Um, the medications, the psychotropic medications that we get are very generic medications, are causing a lot of side effects. Persons are experiencing numbness and shortness of breath, mouth slurs, and I'm saying it because these are things that I have experienced. So I got the mouth slurs and the hand spasms and all these things. And we have, psychiatrists who would say, oh, well, that's just part of taking psychotropic medications, without really considering like this person is in no way having you know a, a good life. They're not being able to live a quality life, and we're also not putting things in place to change that. So those are some of my things, and just even in terms of getting appointments. I have friends that are still waiting to get a psychologist appointment from last year, and they've been waiting on that waiting list. So whilst universal health coverage is wonderful in its framing, it is by no means ideal at all. There are a lot of other things that still need to happen within that universal health coverage system.
I was muted. Okay, let's cut this out.
No worries.
Your comment about the 5 minutes and then you're just kind of like, here's your diagnosis, here's a pill, shove you out of the room, get the next patient, resonates so much with research that I did on psychiatrists at government hospitals in India, urban Indian centers. So really, really congested hospitals. Would have to look at my research again, but like 300 patients a day. I don't know, probably not an exaggeration, even if it sounds like one. And I was trying to figure out by talking to the psychiatrist, like, is this what you want? Do you think that this works? Anticipating that, of course, they would say no. And they did say no. They said, well, this obviously doesn't work. But they had, my question was, can you do informed consent properly in these 5 minutes? And we had interesting discussions about that. But ultimately, I realized that as a human rights, social justice lawyer person, I had this very deontological philosophy of, well, there's some principles that you need to adhere to, like informed consent, human rights, due diligence, and those are important. So I really valued that right to autonomy, to your control over your own body quite a lot. Whereas those psychiatrists really emphasized the right to health. They were like, well, this medication can save lives. If I don't prescribe the medication, who knows what will happen? It's worth a shot. We need to take this risk. It's better than me doing nothing. Also, I have been trained for 15 years as a psychiatrist. It's like in my system that I need to treat. And if I don't, I will have failed my personal mission. And that would give like cognitive dissonance. So that was fascinating to see that even within the human rights-based approach, you have two very clashing perspectives of which thing to value over the other.
Yeah, and I see that, right? And I would love to talk about my own lived experience here, where I had a particular experience within our pub, and that was actually the last time I engaged with our public health system, um, where I went to a psychiatrist, and over repeated appointments with him, I was letting him know, like, hey, I have a lot of suicidal ideations right now. And I also have a plan. Like, I have a very clear plan. And he asked me about it, and we had those kinds of discussions. Um, and I remember telling him very clearly, like, my plan is to take medication. And he hands me a prescription for psychotropic medications. And he says, don't go and kill yourself, in those very clear terms. And this is what makes me worry, because whilst I understand, the psychotropics do work, and I understand, you know, there is a they worry about what would happen, I do feel that there is an added piece of the conversation of, are we doing our very best before we prescribe the psychotropic medications to ensure that we've covered all the other things. Like, there were so many other conversations he needed to have with me before he handed me that prescription. So yeah, I feel confused within myself, because I understand the pressures within the system, right? I understand that it's overbooked. That there's not enough psychiatrists for persons. The average. I think the average for Trinidad and Tobago right now is like one mental health professional to every 100,000 persons. So I understand the pressures that they're working under, right? And that is very significant. But also within that, I also feel like there can be, and there has been, a lot of harm that is being caused when we make those pressures go before patients' life, and I really think that our mental health systems on a whole really need to step back and figure out, are these systems working? Because I don't think they are. I don't think they're working in the way that really allows persons to get the best life. I have so many friends on psychotropic medications who still can't find a job or keep a job or have even energy to do anything else, and they've been on psychotropic medications for years. And if our only aim is to get people on medications, then I worry about, what is our real focus in all of this.
Is it money? Is it profit?
Well,
So one of the things that I found on the Mental Health America website was a big emphasis on accessing mental health care for queer and trans people, specifically people of color from the Black community, Indigenous people, in general, LGBTQI plus community, intersecting with the people of color community, because that is one, intersectionality was coined as a concept in order to highlight discrimination and marginalization. So this is like the pinnacle of marginalization. And one of the things that I was wondering, I mean, you do have a background in counseling psychology. You did do some courses on that, at least. And it's probably been a while, but how was back then the training like for you when it came to such intersectional challenges, having people with very particular experiences? Was that on the syllabus, on the curriculum at all? Has it, if it wasn't, has it nowadays shifted onto the curriculum? And when you're saying we need to change our systems for mental health care, how are the counselors currently doing when it comes to such intersectional challenges with LGBTQI plus and POC?
Yeah, so I will speak from my Trinidad and Tobago lens here. So the program that I did, so I do have my undergraduate degree in psychology and counseling, but bringing a Trinidad and Tobago context into it, LGBTQIA plus persons actually don't have rights. 2018, same sex sexual acts were decriminalized, but that's as far as we've reached. And therefore, we actually had the first organization about a month ago or so offering for the first time same sex partners can be covered under the insurance, right? So we have a lot of way to go when it comes to the curriculum. One, I went to a Christian university, so in a country where um, LGBTQ have no rights, our curriculum will not ever cover that until the actual system and the acts and stuff are enforced. So no change has happened in that regard. Even as it pertains to counselors, one of the conversations I was having with my team just recently is the fact that there is only one counselor that persons know of that they they don't call themselves queer affirming, um but the reason why a lot of LGBT persons would go to them is because they belong to that community, right? That for me is good, but it's also for me kind of dangerous when your policy doesn't actually speak to why you consider yourself queer affirming, what it actually means. And the conversation I was having with my team at PWMI is that so the basis of PWMI, we will be starting to have affordable and accessible peer support and clinical services available for persons in Trinidad and Tobago and India. And we want to specifically speak to what does it really mean to be queer affirming or LGBT affirming? What does that actually look like when it comes to the safety of the population? When it comes to things like consent, when it comes to things like being non-judgmental and being empathetic, like what are those specific things that will make the population feel safe? So yeah, like I said, we it's not there, but I have hope in the sense that even though we don't have acts right now that specifically speaks to any sort of anti-discrimination against LGBT folks, I consider it right now the responsibility of organizations to start doing so, because we can, right? So we had Scotiabank, that first organization to offer same-sex partners insurance. Like they didn't have to, but they did. They took that stance, and I'm really grateful. They also are doing an LGBT youth mentorship. Like many organizations do, especially knowing Scotiabank and their global landscape and the um there being such a known organization in Trinidad and Tobago, they don't have to take that stance. They also, and I'm sure they're very much aware that they would receive very much a backlash from taking that stance, but they have. And I think it's really important for organizations to stand with the community right now and to push policies into being. And this is why I love social justice, right? Because activism works, and yeah, and really push those things into being. So this is me having faith in the system that 5 years from now I would probably be able to answer this question in a much different way.
Let's do that. Also, super random that the program is expanded to Trinidad and Tobago and India. That was a nice gimmick. So, me just mentioning random Indian trivia doesn't actually get too awkward in this conversation, but fits in a little bit. So, Steve, I'm going to pass back the mic to you for your last questions and your fun question at the end. And then let's wrap this baby up.
Yeah, I mean, I've just found it fascinating. It's been a fascinating conversation, learning a lot, I must say, particularly about the LGBTQ plus. I recently did an episode with someone in Thailand on that, and that kind of blew my mind. But from what you've said, Kat, about it, and from what you've said about the way that psychiatrists are like only talking to you for 5 minutes, they hear your clear plans for suicide, and then they give you the medication and they say to you, try not to kill yourself, or please don't kill yourself. I mean, that is, one, irresponsible, and two, isn't that bordering on negligence on the part of the doctor? Because they've heard what your plan is, but they have still given you the medication, knowing full well what your plan is. I mean, what would have happened if, God forbid, you had gone through with that? Would the doctor have been struck off, or would he have just got a slap on the wrist, Kat?
My my lived experience of my country, he would have gotten a slap on the wrist. And I say this to say, this the experience didn't end there. After that happened, I actually, so one of the things that I don't do within my public health systems is I don't introduce myself as activist cat, right? And I specifically don't do that because I want to see the experience that I would have. And when that happened, I kind of got frustrated because this has been over a couple of different appointments of me seeing, I am struggling, I need help. So I took to my social media and let, my folks know, like, hey, this has been my experience. And I had his boss's boss reach out to me to say, we're so sorry, what, and she was just really kind, and she was like, what can we do, like, what do you want, what do you need? And I gave her very specific things of like, hey, I want to be checked in, I want my medication to be changed to this specific psychotropic medication that I believe would help me, having been on all these different ones for so long. And I gave those very specific instructions, that she was able to fulfill. What I wanted to see, those, what would have happened to him. And according to my knowledge, while I was checked in, he was still there, working there. So that alone tells me that I don't think that much would have happened. And I would also add the point that my partner, who also sees someone within the public system, was obviously really worried about me, and told her counselor what was happening, and the counselor's response was like, "Oh no, not him again." So that says a lot. And this is one of the peeves that I have in terms of the accountability aspect and the actual reformation. It it's hard to get people to care and get people to care enough to change. And I don't know how to begin it, because if something as serious as that incident didn't cause that, I kind of feel a little bit of fear and worry.
Mhm, mhm. I mean, that is just staggering, and shouldn't happen. I mean, if so, you can only get the treatment that you want if you say that you're an activist, because it literally scares the bejesus out of them, and they're thinking, right, hang on a minute. If I do one thing wrong here, then this isn't going to end well for me. That just should not be the case. It's shocking. It's wrong. Um, and he or she should have been not just a slap on the wrist, but for that, I mean, that is just negligent behaviour, plain and simple. I mean, in terms of, so the fun question at the end, I like to add a fun question at the end, not only of podcasts, but of the YouTube, because mental health can be a very heavy topic. There can be a lot of different things discussed. So the most popular one at the moment is that if a movie director came to you and wanted to do a film about you, and they asked you who you wanted to play you in your own film, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's such an excellent question. Um, I cannot remember the actress's name right now. But she did this. She acted in this TV show on Netflix. She's gotta have it. She's gotta have it. She played Nola Darling. Oh God, I can't remember her name, but I'm particularly drawn to her because of the energy she played in that role. It was funny, yet it was very like, I am not gonna take nonsense from no one, and I'm gonna be my most authentic me. And whether you like it or not, I'm still gonna be it. And I love that energy that she portrayed in that TV show. I just can't remember her name right now.
Wanda
Um,
Wise.
yes, thank you so much. Yeah, and everything about her energy speaks to the inner cat. So yeah, she will definitely be that person.
Well, I must say it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the YouTube channel. Um, I think in terms of summing up the episode, I think one of the things that you mentioned that has stuck with me throughout is that everyone has mental health, and everyone needs to look after their own mental health, not just their physical health. They need to start looking at mental health in a similar way to physical health, because they are both interlinked. They both run side by side. So yeah, it's been a fascinating episode, a lot of insights, very informative. It's been a pleasure, Kat. Thank you.